I love it when DC is a complete mess. Best way to get to hell is carefully through compromise. I get attacked online all the time, right? And for one reason or another, and I
Well, to
certainly
be
open
frank, we
myself
do
up
too.
for
You
it.
should see our comment section. So
Yeah, okay, good.
welcome out to God and Country. Another great guest on with us this week. We're going to have Daniel McCay, who is a senator here in Utah, not U.S. senator, but state senator. He's had a lot of great policies that he's been able to put through and put into action, and we're looking forward to discussing those. Remember that as soon as the government opens up, we're going to have ICE on, we're going to have Border Patrol on. Senator Mike Lee's also agreed to come on, but all three of those just waiting for government to open up, which, as we've said in multiple podcasts before, doesn't look like it's going to be happening anytime soon. The Democrats are kind of holding out and thinking they've got some kind of leverage, but I don't think they have any leverage at all. The No Kings protest kind of gave them some ammunition, and they think they can just carry that kind of momentum forward, but I think that's going to wane fairly quickly. But hopefully,
Sure hope so.
government opens up fairly soon, and then we can finally get ICE and Border Patrol and Senator Mike Lee rescheduled and back onto the podcast. Again, like, subscribe, share the podcast. Again, anything that's conservative or good kind of gets suppressed by YouTube and other channels, so help us out by becoming listeners and not just subscribers. We'd like to introduce everybody to Senator Daniel McCay. Senator, how are you doing today?
Hey, thanks for having me. It's good to be on.
It's great to have you on. You've done a lot over the years. We're going to be looking forward to discussing the abortion bill, the transgender flag bills, the no boys in women's restrooms bills, all that we completely support, and we're glad that those things went through without too much complication. We're going to be discussing what the problem is with our Utah Supreme Court and why they won't get
What is the problem with them?
abortion bill going. But let's kind of start off with kind of how you grew up, where you grew up, and kind of where you got your morals and values, how those were kind of instilled into you.
Sure. Well, let's see. I guess we've got time, so I can give you the long version of all of these. For years I've given the practiced. People want to hear the 30-second version, so I just get through that and move on, right? So I was born in St. Louis, Missouri, and we lived in rural parts of Missouri. Growing up, and for us, it was I don't know, didn't really know much different, but my parents at the time, you could tell the strength of their relationship by where we lived. When my parents got along, we lived in Missouri. When they didn't get along, we lived in San Diego, which is where my grandmother lived. And so, the fun part is we bounce back and forth quite a bit.
Siblings?
Yeah, and so I've got two brothers that one lives here in Utah and the other one lives in California still. He lives in my parents' house back in California. And after my aunt, when I was 17, my aunt passed away of cancer. And my mom volunteered to raise her three kids. And so at some point, we all kind of consider ourselves a family of, 6 kids. I'm the oldest, and two sisters and three brothers. Let's see. So I was gonna say in school, like I said, we jumped around a lot. In K through 12 education, I went to 11 different schools.
That is jumping around quite a bit.
Jumped around quite a bit. There were times when things were, great at home. And there were times that, like anybody else's family, times they weren't. There were times, we lived on the streets for a little while and, struggled through, those types of things. And, I look back on it and I try to remember, really what the common theme of my childhood was. And honestly, I think people would look at it and say there's a lot of struggle and heartache and pain or that kind of stuff like growing up. But honestly, my mom worked so hard. Prevent us from feeling any of that pain. And so I don't really see it that way. I have lost my mom. Sorry. Lost my mom about 10 years ago. Just last week. And, people like to ask, where do you get your morals? Where do you get your understanding? Where do you get, so many things in life? And I can attribute a lot of the best parts of my life to my mom.
Well, that's a good, honest feeling right there. I mean, all of us are very, very proud of our parents, and I can definitely tell that she's instilled a lot of great values into you. So none of that.
Some of them she instilled through example, and some she instilled through sheer force of will.
Like a good mom does.
Typical teenager,
Yep.
right?
That's exactly right.
Were you in the work industry when times were lean? Were you needing to help out?
Yeah, I started work. I started working when I was, my first job was I was 12. And, just, what we were doing was, there was, companies that back then, now it's not so much, but, people would send out mass mailings and you had to fold the letter, put it in envelopes and, address it and put the stamps on it. And my job was tri-folding paper, letter paper and putting it in an envelope and putting the stamp on it and the address. So I started that as a young guy and I can't remember. I'm trying to remember if it was like 2 cents a letter or something like that we were paid for, for whipping through these things.
About the price of newspaper delivery.
I was a newspaper boy growing up, and I would have to roll those things up and deliver those things. So pretty similar to that.
Yeah, so we did. I got a newspaper route when I was 14, and just kind of from then on, I just always worked. So yeah,
In California or in Missouri?
California.
So none of that California wokeness kind of.
They weren't as woke back then.
They weren't as woke back
Well,
then.
Nice place back then.
You can look at that state and divide it, pretty quickly. Anywhere where there's a lot of people, blue. But anywhere there's not a lot of people, red. And by red, I mean redder than red. I mean, they make some of our Utahns look like they're moderates. Well, there are some Utah moderates, but that's another issue. But I mean, it's, I grew up in San Diego County. So that's there, we lived out in San Diego County, and that's where I went to high school. And it was a very conservative Republican area.
Beautiful area.
We had, both all of our congressional representation out in that area were all Republicans. This is when I was growing up. It only went woke really in the last 20 years. And I wasn't there for it, unfortunately, or fortunately. I mean, sometimes I say unfortunately, because it's if more people had stuck around that had values and those kinds of things, could we have stopped California from becoming
good point.
The left coast it is? I don't know.
I don't know how you would have stopped that, because I mean most of their leftism is because of people moving into the Hollywood area, or they have just a whole bunch of illegals moving into that area that always go left, and so I think they just try to outpopulate those of us who are on the right. Just
Yeah, but think about this. In 2008, Proposition 8 against gay marriage passed in California. That was 2008. That was not that long ago. I mean, it feels like
no,
forever
Yeah.
ago to some of our
it's
kids.
actually true.
It's 2008. That passes in California. And you had a Republican governor shortly thereafter with, Arnold Schwarzenegger as the Republican governor. So people forget that California not that long ago was a red state, or had the potential to be a red state. And it's within the last 20 years that it's just become the mess that it's becoming.
Well, what's your opinion of what Newsom's trying to do with the redistricting out there? I mean, we went over this, just to give you a couple of pointers. We went over this in 3 podcasts ago. So the numbers are that 45% of the state is still Republican. So it's almost half Republican. But right now, as far as representation in Congress, it's about a 73 to 78% representation towards Democrat, and Republicans only have less than 25% representation. If Newsom does the redistricting, you still have a 45% population that's Republican, but it will restrict it clear down to only 7% representation for Republicans. It'd be 93% representation towards Democrats as far as representatives in Congress. And they are constantly trying to compare that to Texas, where Texas is probably 60+%, 63, I think, percent Republican. They only have about a 47% Democrat. And even with the redistricting, it's still within 10 points of each other as far as representation in Congress. So they're still close as far as the representation. So they're trying to skew it completely.
I'll just say, I'm really grateful that Gavin Newsom is doing it. And the reason I'm glad he's doing it is he's laying naked what the Democrats are trying to do really around the country. And he's taken the mask off of the problem. The problem is that as long as one state can, gerrymander, or it's called gerrymandering, but it's gerrymandering too. It's the most common one everybody remembers it by. But as long as one state can gerrymander, and everybody recognizes that geography legitimately is political, right? Once people realize that the geography is political, they realize that all this gerrymandering stuff is really just a proxy war over the social fights that go on in Washington, D.C. And that's why, in blue states, you have reds, you have the Republicans that are pushing like crazy to get independent redistricting commissions in red states, in blue states. And then in blue states, red states, you've got the blues that are trying to push hard to get, the Democrats to get a independent redistricting, because they're hoping to steal a seat or two. And where the margin is so thin, right? We're talking about within 5 to 10 seats on either side, because that's where we are as a nation. When you have that type of divide, it's clearly they're just trying to, on the margin, bend the game their direction so their special interests win over the other team's, special interests. And so my frustration is, it's really not about governance. It's really not about, successful making the country better. It's not about, serving the American people. It's just a proxy war for what goes on in DC. And I have to be honest, I love it when DC is a complete mess, because at the end of the day, they can't tweak the states at all. And so the states can, we're enjoying a bubble of the federal government is out of our business at the moment because they're so busy fighting with each other. And so I love it, because the longer they're doing that and tweaking those things in DC, the better off we are as states to be left alone and run our things autonomously. I look at the concerns over the government shutdown, right? And the SNAP, issues that are coming up. Dude, I would love to find out I'd love to keep working on this and figure it out. We've been talking about it among some of my colleagues to show that, if the federal government just backed away, didn't charge an income tax for covering entitlements, And instead, it was left to the state or to the counties or to the cities. And we set up our own safety nets in ways that met our local needs. Dude, we would be so much better off than a government program that is prescriptive across the country. And that's my 10th Amendment self that's like, great. We got all this statewide, countrywide freedom right now because DC can't pass anything. So great. And I love it a little bit when there's a Republican in charge, but Congress has completely abdicated its responsibility. And, we are literally being run by executive orders as a country. I mean, that's why every team is so excited day one, the minute they get in office, when there's a change of, of the party in the office, they've got a host of executive orders that they cannot wait to sign so that they can, flip the country on its head based on whatever its executive order is. And it's all because Congress can't figure its, pardon my expression, ass from a hole in the ground.
Yeah, they're not getting anything done over there right now.
No.
Hey, this is Uriah Kennedy with the God and Country podcast, and they're one of the main reasons why I live in the Rocky Mountains in Utah is because there is nothing I enjoy more like getting out in the great outdoors. I absolutely love getting out there and camping, hiking, fishing, everything with my family. We do that every single year. Throughout the winter months, we're up there snowmobiling. The summer months, we're out there RVing or ATVing. We absolutely love it. It's the best time of the year we have together as a family. There is nothing like getting out there with the proper equipment. And we all know and trust Coleman since we were kids. Our parents, our grandparents have used Coleman for generations. They have the best tents, sleeping bags, coolers, cooking materials, and anything else you can possibly think of that you might need while you're out there enjoying the great outdoors. Please support our channel by going to the link in our description or scanning the QR code that's popping up on your screen and going to Coleman to buy all these needs. Whatever it is you can possibly think of, again, from stoves, tents, sleeping bags, coolers, any type of camping utensils, cooking utensils, fuel, whatever it is you can possibly need, click on the link in our description or the QR code that's popping up on your screen. Support the channel by buying any of this outdoor equipment at Coleman. We love the wide variety of products that Coleman has made over the years and how trustworthy those products have been. Coleman has a world-renowned name, something we've grown up trusting, and if you can think of it, they probably have it. So again, click on the link in our description or scan the QR code popping up your screen. Support this channel and keep watching. They had an interview with Arnold Schwarzenegger. I think it was on MSNBC or CNN, and I kind of mentioned this thing. And he was talking about Massachusetts, New Mexico, and a few other states where, again, you have a 45% population that is Republican, but yet New Mexico, Massachusetts, and I think one other state, I don't think it was Illinois, but 100% Democrat representation in Congress, 100%. So none of that Republican constituency has any representation at all in Congress at all.
They're sure crying hard.
So they're completely disenfranchised, and yet Democrats are crying.
The Dems are crying.
That it is not fair on their side, but yet in every single one of the states that we have where we've done redistricting, the amount of representation that both sides have is still within 10 points of each other. So which side is doing the gerrymandering?
Yeah, well, I will say they're probably all guilty, but I will also say I don't think there's a solution. In other words, we are far better off just letting the geography be political as a country than we are trying to, fit everybody into an independent box or some nationwide solution to deal with it. Because as our framers originally intended, local policies should be able to demonstrate and show success of local culture. And you've got to have that local overlap of policy and culture. And if people aren't comfortable in that culture, they'll leave and they'll find a culture that, matches their identity or whomever they want to be. What's interesting, and this is, this morning I stumbled across an article about it was basically a person that said, "Hey, I'm a Democrat. I moved to a Democrat state, and I can't leave fast enough. I've got to get back to a red state." And the premise of the article was, I didn't realize how they didn't realize how bad the Democrats were at managing a state or managing local issues. And when you think about, think about basic things like permissiveness related to drugs, or like, I just can get worse from there. Think about the homeless struggle that we're dealing with, or legalizing drugs like you've got, in Oregon and some of these other, blue states. And those types of issues show that when you take away, I mean, who knew, when you think about the gospel of Jesus Christ, who knew that when you take out all rules and say that nothing matters and there's no morality, there's no, you don't make any decisions for anybody else, who knew that that would lead to a system-wide cultural, fabric breakdown?
Chaos
Who knew?
ensues, right?
We've been warned so many times.
Well, you
So,
have an interesting perspective of saying sovereign states can take advantage in this situation. What advantages can Utah take?
well, you saw today, the president and the speaker, so legislative leadership announced that, we're putting $4 million that, we have available towards, food for those who are in need. And we're going to be using it at the food pantries through the food bank. And the LDS Church, I'm sure, is going to be working hand in glove to try and make sure that the people we care about, like the people that are our neighbors, that they're the ones that, we've got a social construct that we can set up and take care of each other far better, in my opinion, far better than really the government can do.
Agreed.
And that's the part that I really would love to see, is us step up and fill those needs and show the federal government that we can do it better, and then they can with some bureaucratic program that, in essence, the SNAP program has become a complete disaster. I mean, statistics show that it's like something like 20 or 25%. I can't remember the exact number, so don't quote me on the percentage, but a large percentage of SNAP benefits are being used for Uber Eats
Mhm.
and those type of payments, as opposed to, raw food that people can cook and do those kinds of things with. And so,
How can we
we've
better
got
police the way that it's used and having it go to those who are truly in need instead of those who want to take advantage of the system?
Well, I think the problem is that we're offering it at all from the government. That is the problem. If our faith communities were left to handle these needs, we would be far better off, far better off. And even for those who aren't in faith communities, I don't know one faith community who's like, yeah, you can't eat and we're not giving you food just because you don't worship with us every Sunday, or every Saturday, or whenever you choose to worship. And I just believe that, we as Christians, we as, religious people, we would do a far better job getting the government out of our social network, or out of our social safety net. We'd do far better if it was us. And that's I will say, one of the problems I think we have as a country is that we've abdicated some of our faith-based responsibilities to the government.
Which is
The
sad that
God,
we're doing that. Which is very sad
yeah, I
we're
mean,
doing that.
Jesus never told us. Jesus never told us, give money to Caesar so that Caesar could then give money to your neighbor. That was
Right.
never the responsibility, right? Anyway,
I just saw a report that came out by Health and Human Services, Kennedy's office there, that over 50% of SNAP benefits are going to illegals. Over 50% of them. And the surprising number he put out is, everybody thinks, well, when they're talking about illegals, they're talking about Latin America. But he said, no, the vast majority of SNAP benefits are going to Middle Easterners. And he put up these numbers like all these immigrants from Iraq, Somalia, Syria, Afghanistan, all these that are considered refugees that have come over, he says that somewhere in the neighborhood of 90 to 93% of all these refugees are on SNAP benefits. He says none of them are working, none of them are sustaining themselves. I mean, that just got put out, I think, 2 days ago by Health and Human Services.
So Senator has a point, because if
shows the abuses there.
if a faith-based communities were taking care of that, then okay, rather than the tax dollar going to illegals.
Yeah.
Right. And it's so hard, because I will say this, when we say it, that we, it's not that we don't want people who are here illegally. It's not that we don't want them to eat. That's not the objective. And I don't think anybody feels that way. It's just, how do you, and whenever it's the government, they're using compulsion or force. How do you take the gun, point it at somebody's head, say, we're going to take away your property, we're going to take away your livelihood, we're going to take away your ability to earn money for your family, we're going to do all of those things if you don't pay your income tax, so that we can then take that money and give it to people who are not here legally. That doesn't add up to me, but I think that's the Democrats' secret plan of importing a bunch of, supportive votes is going to be tough, for us to overcome for a while. It's going to take a number of years really to fix this, hundreds of thousands of people over a completely unguarded border. Who does that?
Hundreds of thousands is being nice.
Yeah.
No, I know. I'm just saying, it's a big number. But I will say this, some of those folks that came over here are aware that the systems they're fleeing didn't work. And, they also realize, hey, America's system's better. What can we come and learn? The hardest is when some show up and, want to bring the mess they move from and bring it here. And that's, never helpful either. I mean, I hear that complaint all the time. I get called a rhino Californian all the time, which is, hilarious. But, the idea that people come from other places and try and ascribe their, push their values from that place onto their new places, it's probably not very well thought out.
And a lot of them want to push what they had in their own countries here. I mean, we've done multiple podcasts where they've interviewed people on the street, and it says, well, the only good system was communism, and Russia's the best example of that. And you're bringing that here. And we had the one guy, Mexican guy that was interviewed in California, says, well, we were all doing just fine until you guys showed up here and screwed it all up. We were here first.
You stole this land from us.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, it's
a lot of bad.
Totally understandable. Yeah, totally. It's just I will just say, I think Congress, this is just, the sad part about our immigration policy is there is low hanging conservative methods to solve the immigration problem. And they are easily implementable, but Congress refuses to solve the problem because they get to run on it as a wedge issue. And if they solved it, well, it wouldn't be a problem. But it was like, well, what's the solution? It's easy. People want to come here for work, right? And I have known several people who, they want to come here for work. So they come here for work. And the problem is they stay not because they want to, they stay because the cost of getting across the border, it's a harrowing, difficult, life-threatening venture for many people to get across the border. And once they get across the border, they don't want to go back because they don't want to repeat that experience. So that's one. But if they had the ability to come and work and then return home and be with their family, most of those who are here illegally would do that in a moment. They would come here, they'd work, they'd perform whatever labor that they want to be part of, and then they could go back and be with their family during the non-agricultural season or whatever, the type of job is. And that type of ability could easily be solved if the employers we're bonding, so to speak, so that somebody who's coming here and wants to work, if they have a financial interest to make sure that that person returns, and they're guaranteeing that person's housing, they're guaranteeing that person's health care or whatever while they're here, that situation flips, and now the one who is benefiting, right, from the lower cost labor or whatever, they get that lower cost labor, and at the same time they get the ability to make sure that it's self-enforced just financially by making it their best interest to make sure everybody gets returned and gets back and forth. And you come up with a program that then rewards people who do it with who come back and forth with very little enforcement or concern, and people that don't get involved in the entitlement programs and don't get on to welfare, SNAP benefits, those types of things. You take and you align the incentives for everybody. It's an immigration program that could work for everyone, but the problem is Congress wants nothing to do with solutions on this issue, unfortunately, because they would much rather show up on the news and complain about whatever the latest issue might be related to it.
Well, I think the main problem is Democrats want voters, and that's just straight up what they want.
We don't. So you're not here to vote.
Yeah, they're trying to import their voters, and so they're trying to figure out a path to citizenship. They're trying to get them on the census, so at least that helps them pick up a couple more seats, right?
Yeah.
So that's their sole goal, and the way they're going to do it is they're buying those votes through SNAP benefits,
100%.
through Medicare, Medicaid, through all this stuff, and so they have that loyalty. They did that to the black population, which is why it's suppressed them for so many years, and they're struggling to get out of that. And they're going to want to do it the same way to the illegal population, the Latin community. So the right sees that and says, okay, if their only goal is to have a path to citizenship, to path to voting, and that will completely skew U.S. elections from here on, we've got to steer as far away from that as possible. So the right takes the extreme. Nobody can come across. We don't want anything to do with it. There's no work permits. There's no solution to this. They all got to leave. Just out. And it's not that
but
Republicans don't want to push them all out. It's right. The fear that we have of Democrats trying to figure out a way to get them voting.
And maybe that's why the Dems, maybe that's really the impasse. Maybe the impasse isn't necessarily over, the humanity of it, right? The impasse is over the votes. The Dems want the votes, and the Republicans don't want the votes, which I don't know anybody who thinks non-citizens should be able to show up and vote in some other country's elections. That makes no sense to me. But the idea that it actually, I wanted to believe in better angels, I guess, that on the Democrat side, but maybe it's just that simple. Maybe they just want the votes.
That's all they've ever wanted. They just want the vote straight up, because they're losing a lot of their voting population. I think just since Trump's gotten into office, I think the numbers are somewhere around 4 million have switched to either independent or Republican since he's gotten into office. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So they're looking at a midterm election coming up next year saying, how are we going to win this? Because it usually swings. Almost every midterm swings to the other party, and it does not look like it's going to swing this next midterm, and they know that, and I think it's scaring them, because we've always said that you paint a line into the corner, paint a wolf in the corner, they get desperate. And with Democrats not having the House, not having the Senate, not having the White House, not having even the Supreme Court, Trump is taking out their deep state operatives and taking out all the money they used to funnel around to get their programs going without legislation. So they're losing every little semblance of power that they've ever had. And even a lot of the black population is now starting to swing, so they're losing that. So they're looking at, okay, where are we going to get our power from? And it's the illegal immigrants, which is why they had the border open for so long.
Yeah. Unfortunately, I want to believe it's more than that, but you might be right.
Yeah, sad but true. So let's backtrack and ask you, how did you get into politics? How did that start?
Oh yeah.
What interested you in politics? And
Well, um, I met the devil one day, and he said, "I can get you elected if you'll sell me your soul." I'm just kidding. Um, the I've always been interested. I've always been really interested in current events. Like it's always been, like that's always been a thing for me. I remember, I mean, I used to get in trouble. We talked about having a paper route. Uh, you remember, like, what time did you have to get up for your paper route in the morning?
oh, that's the only part I hated about it. It was like at 5 a.m. It was horrible.
Oh, it was 5 a.m. I remember like you're crazy, I remember getting up at 5 a.m. to fold the papers, right? And there was just and you had to fold them. And, back then I had a basket on the front of my bike, and was riding the bike and it was freaking cold. And, now this is San Diego, so it's San Diego cold. So, right. It's not Utah cold. I get that. I'm a little bit delicate when it comes to cold. Okay. I'll fully admit that. Um, but you get up at 5 a.m. and you're folding the papers, but I I used to get in trouble because my mom would come out and it was like 6:15 or 6:20, and I had to be back and ready to like go to school by 7. And I was supposed to have the papers on the front door before 6:30, if I remember right. But sometimes I would be sitting in the driveway and just reading the newspaper, like, and just pouring through like little things. And I would read the paper forward to back every day. And that was just,
That's adorable.
I was just always that nerdy kid. Well, I will just say I was not as fun to talk to at lunchtime because I was more interested in like, Gorbachev and, Ronald Reagan type issues. And, Roger Hedgecock back then was, part of Ollie North and the Iran Contra
Oh,
affair and
yeah.
all those things. I was very well read on those issues as a 14-year-old. And my buddies wanted to talk about Garbage Pail Kids and, other sports stuff, which I was also really into the sports page. But anyway, all that to say, like I was always super interested in like current events. And when our member of the House of Representatives stepped down, he resigned to run for Congress, Carl Wimmer. And he was a heck of a guy, super principled, smart, hardworking guy. And he decided he was going to run for Congress. And we have this ban in statute that you're not allowed to fundraise while you're in the legislative session for obvious conflict of interest reasons. Like that's not that hard to figure out. But if somebody's running for Congress and they have such a narrow window leading up to convention and then the primary and all those things, if somebody's running for an open seat for Congress, taking 7 weeks out of your schedule and saying during that period while you're serving in the legislature still, you can't fundraise also and you can't accept donations was pretty brutal back then. And so Carl Wimmer stepped down and he got some legal advice that he could still do it, but everybody thought that it was bad PR, right? It didn't look good on a campaign type of thing if you're doing it. So he didn't want to deal with all that drama and decided to step down. But he decided to step down. I think it was the 26th or 27th of December, and decided he was gonna, take, go run for, and he was running for Congress. And so I was actually seeing that if he was going to run for Congress, I was like, well, I might run for his seat the next year and see how that worked out. But where he stepped down, it became a special election. And from December 26th or 27th, when he stepped down, I can't remember, to like January 19th, because the legislative session started the 21st or something, if I remember. So you had till the 19th that year. So it was like, 3 weeks for a full election. And I'm like, oh, I could do that, you know. And I think there were 6 or 7 other people, if I remember right, that jumped in to the race. There was a sitting mayor of Harriman. There was a member of the Jordan School Board. There was a former mayor. There were a couple of other like folks in the community that were going to run. And I thought, well, I don't stand a chance, but I'm going to go knock on all these doors and just see what happens. And I got, went through all that. And literally the night of the election, I gave a speech. I sat down and I got elected on the first ballot with 7 candidates in the race. And I did not think I was going to win. I mean, I was in shock. Because, there's these other more experienced people that have run for office before.
What do you think it
And
was? What resonated?
I don't know. That's a good question. I guess I've never really thought about it because I still don't know how I won. Like I'm still there's still times I pull into the Capitol that I'm like, I can't believe this is my job. Like I can't believe this is me. Like there's still several times. I'll talk about that more in a second. But anyway, so I won. I the next morning I get a phone call from the chief clerk of the House, Sandy Tenney, and she's like, she said, well, you need to come up here and fill out some paperwork and get some things going for the governor's appointment. And I said, well, you'll forgive me. I don't know where I'm going. I've actually, and this, you'll laugh, maybe, I don't know. I'd actually never been inside the Capitol before I got elected. I'd been to the outside and walked around the outside and, that this is the outside, but I had never been on the inside
That
of the
place is a
Capitol before.
maze.
It is, and it is a maze. And so luckily the chief clerk met me down at the front doors and walked me up to the house and then, filled out all the paperwork and that was the whole thing. But yeah, I need to think about that question. Like, why did I think it was? I have to be honest.
What year was
I
that?
think it's 2012. So it's January 2012. Um, I do think that voters, just as I've become somewhat of a student of elections over the last 15 years or whatever. And I do think there's something, I think the voters generally like when it's a new office, an open office, they like throwing people in there that have no experience. I think voters genuinely do. It's like,
I think we
I
do
just
that
want,
because we actually just spoke with Tiara Auxier.
yeah,
She had the
perfect
exact
example.
same experience you did. It was
Hmm.
a special election, and she only had 2 weeks. I think she had 2 weeks. I think she had less
Sure.
time than you did to get into office.
You're
And
right.
yet, she had the same thing as I had. I was completely shocked that I got into office. 'Cause
That
I
surprises
was a nobody, and
Yeah.
voters I think are like that, particularly here in Utah. Is we just want to throw nobody in here. We don't like the career politicians. So
I think they also like an element of relatability, to like, who you are and where you are. I think, at the time I was, I had let's see, I had 3 kids at the time. A fourth was coming and then we had 2 more, so we got 6 total. But at the time it was just, I think, young family. I have a pretty young area out here, very conservative, red Republican area. And, I was more of I still am more of a Tea Party, Republican. I was more fixed on, I'm more fixed on things Ezra Taft Benson talked about, necessarily than President Trump all the time. I'm always stuck on proper role of government type of conversations more than I am some of the populism that is also a big deal right now in the party and those kinds of things. I struggle with some of the populism because things that sound good aren't always, they're not always the best, policy as things go. They're not always the most principled approach, but I do remember one can't, one funny story from when I was running for office that first time, out knocking doors and talked to this older gentleman. He was like, well, just I showed him a picture of my family or that guy, or maybe he'd seen it on social media or whatever. But he said, I'm sorry, I can't vote for you. I'm like, what do you mean? I was like, I can't vote for anybody that hasn't raised teenagers. And I was like, oh, rude. Like in my mind, I'm just thinking like, oh, Like, what's wrong with, I mean, okay, whatever. Teenagers are hard. I get it. Blah, blah, blah. Right. Oh my goodness. I went back. I will tell you this when I ran for the Senate, because I was in the House for 7 years. By then I'd had a teenager, right? And my teenager had graduated, my oldest teenager had graduated high school. And so by then I went back and knocked on his door when I was running for election for the Senate. And I said, hey, you can vote for me now. And he said, what do you mean? I said, well, you told me you wouldn't vote for me because I hadn't raised teenagers. And I said, yeah, that's true. I won't. He said, but I'll tell you, I said, I had my oldest teenager and in very, I joke with her about this, but I'm serious. When I say at the age of like 15 and a half, an alien ship showed up and dropped off a terrible third generation VHS copy of my daughter. And she lived in our house for the next 3 years. And then around 21, 22, the alien ship showed up again and dropped it off the original and like took back the poor alien copy, And I will say those few years were very formative for me. They were hard. You have expectations of what you think being a parent is and what child rearing is going to be, and those were hard. And so I enjoyed going back to that gentleman's door and saying, look, I've been through Moses's wilderness, through trip through the desert. I get it, and now I know why. And I have to be honest, I'm not sure I would vote for anybody who hasn't raised teenagers either.
This is Uriah Kennedy from God and Country, and I grew up around guns. That's something that was just a normal thing. I knew where my father's guns were, and I knew what gun safety was, even from the smallest point as a child. There is nothing that taught me that more than having my own BB gun while growing up. BB guns provide hours of fun for kids and teenagers as well as for adults. But at the same time, that is teaching you great marksmanship. It is also teaching you gun safety in a better and safer way. There is nothing better as a father than to be able to go with my children and teach them the skills of gun safety, gun accuracy, and be able to do it in a fun and inexpensive manner. I've always had a Crossman growing up. Crossmans provide excellent accuracy and a lot of power for a BB gun. There's a lot of different styles to choose from different types of air rifles and pistols, even to fully automatic BB guns and other types of air guns. You need to go to the link in our description or click on the QR code that's coming up on your screen to be able to go to Crossman and make those BB gun purchases, those air rifle purchases. Again, it's going to supply you hours of fun and enjoyment with you and your kids, as well as you as an adult. And BBs are a lot less expensive than actual ammunition. So go to Crossman by using the link in our description or the QR code that's popping up on the screen and enjoy the accuracy, the quality of construction, and the hours of family fun that you will have with these air rifles and BB guns. Again, the link in the description, the QR code that's popping up on your screen, and then support our channel. Thank you. I would believe that.
If you haven't done it, I mean, if you have never done it and you can't see how your wonderful wife and, yourself can make a wonderful person, and this person could be amazing, and then high school comes and they turn into someone else. If you haven't seen that experience, I don't know how you could govern. I really don't.
Well, the scary part about that is what's happening in our high schools, and particularly when we take this young kid that struggle all through high school, and then we send them off to a school that's heavily booked nowadays, and we hoping that they stay conservative. We hoping that they have their morals and values when they come out of college, but most of them are not. They're complete 180s when they come out of college. That's just scary too.
This is what I missed. This is what for years, I was worried about the next generation. Like, what is the next generation? How are my kids what's the future of this republic that we live in, and try to figure those things out. And then along comes like Turning Point USA, right? And I don't know what it was about Charlie Kirk. I don't know what it was about, the people that surrounded him, but for some reason they found a wave that they could ride and remind all of our kids some of the most amazing things that they had been taught as kids, or maybe not been taught, right? But some of the amazing principles that make fantastic human beings and contributing human beings to society. And for some reason, people listen to him. Like our young people, like listen to him. And that's, that's been the hardest part, of after his assassination is for the life of me, I'm back to worrying about that next generation just a little bit, except I keep seeing statistics show up. Like, there's a study that was released yesterday, that was posted about, the activity rate of children in or of youth in churches exceeds where their parents were. I love seeing stats like that.
Yeah,
And that's
Yeah, the
amazing
youth
to
are
see,
turning
too.
around. I feel a lot of hope.
we saw some massive stats. I mean, the number of people who have gone back to church, and I think, and we've stated this many times before, is the martyrdom was necessary to launch that movement because
I believe that.
everybody has revived in Christianity, and it's awesome to see in our universities. It's awesome to see how powerful that's become. We're talking to Caroline Fippen and how much growth they're having just in local universities.
Yeah, she was saying how
Hundreds.
college Republicans are on fire across the state.
Hundreds signing up.
More of our youth, although Ocasio came on and said it was because conservatives are targeting young male adults and teaching them that,
Young white male
yes,
adults.
young white male adults, and that they need to be more aggressive or put down the white and the brown, whatever people. And yeah, so she's attributing it to something different.
Yeah, but that's so baseless. I mean, at the end of the day, the idea that, what I don't understand is that, they think that the best thing for white people to do is to abandon their culture or to abandon their heritage or be ashamed of who they are. And that's one of the things I loved about, Charlie Kirk, Turning Point. I love about a lot of the youth, movement folks that are, stepping into those roles. I just love that they're saying we're done being ashamed of like stuff. That whole curriculum of, DEI and the, diversity, equity, inclusion, where it is everybody else first and white people last, or that whole concept is worse in so many ways. I am one that believes that a rising tide floats all boats. I came from tough situations from a poverty standpoint, but I watched the rising tide float so many boats and everybody just keep getting better. I watched our country go through, I would argue, the 80s and 90s from a growth standpoint. We just kept growing and there was so much opportunity, and we're not going to get better by telling one group of people that they shouldn't have opportunities or that their opportunities should come at the expense of that opportunities for other people come at the expense of someone else's. That's scarcity mindedness. And I'm telling you, scarcity mindedness is a one-way track to poverty.
No, there's beyond that, because they're using it as a tool for pride and to lift themselves up. I'm better than you.
Absolutely.
I know more than you. And it's like the old pride talk that's been given in our church, that it's not about having something, it's about having something better or more of it than somebody else.
And someone else.
That's the issue they're having, is they're trying to compare themselves to white people, and white people were industrious, we work. Not saying that they don't, but it's the comparison that's causing the problem, and it's the comparison that's creating DEI. It's, I want that, give it to me,
Yeah.
because I don't want to work for it. I just want to have it.
Yeah, and I love that
don't
idea.
have, not to interrupt you, but you don't have
Yeah.
the same morals and value. You don't have the same principles if you don't earn it, because it's just not there. You don't appreciate anything that you don't physically go out and earn. We did a podcast with Erica Schlichty, who runs Warrior Risen Ranch down here. And one thing she noticed about all our veterans that have and their families have gone through just horrible circumstances, loss of limbs or loss of life. When she got those kids and teenagers who just hated life, hated everything because of what they've gone through, went out there and just worked, just physical, hard labor. They did nothing else. Their minds and hearts completely changed, and they did nothing more than just physical, hard labor, earning something, demonstrating that I can do that, I can accomplish this. Changed everything about that. And when you have a certain population that all they want is just have stuff given to them, which is the whole problem with SNAP benefits right now, is just you the taxpayers owe that to me. I've seen a number of TikToks and Instagrams where there's people saying, I don't know what I'm going to do. You taxpayers, you owe me. I've got 7 kids and 4 baby daddies, and I'm doing this all by myself. You have to give me this money. And they just don't earn anything. And there's just no appreciation, no consideration. There's no work ethic. There's no values at all in that.
I'll say it is in my mind's eye, the way I think about it is, in a Christ-centered society, we are holding hands and lifting each other constantly, right? And it's a lifting together in my mind. But it's not the government's job to reach out and hold the hands. It's us, right? We've got to lift, and we've got to be the ones lifting. And I think in a society where, really it's Satan's principle, it is not lifting it with each other. It is pushing on the heads of others to try and rise, right?
Yeah,
and
you can see
and
that.
I don't feel, in my mind, I don't worship a God who wants me to rise by pushing other people down. And so I am, I think,
well, it's also you're too small. You can't do it. You need me. You need me, who's larger than you, to do it. You can't do it yourself.
That's absolutely right. And the truth of it is, we all kind of need each other, right? In so many ways. And I'm just in my mind, I'm trying to figure out how we ever undo some of the government incursion that we've allowed into our lives, where our first, and this is, I think, the real difference between, in my mind, the real difference to me between Democrats and Republicans is where they think the answer is. Democrats believe, I think we can agree, homelessness is a problem. I think we can agree that drugs, alcohol, whatever, like too much of those things are all problems. Okay. And we can agree on that. The thing I think we can agree on is they believe that we should raise a tax to then create a program to help solve the problem. Where I believe, and the Republican Party I want to be part of, is that instead we say, okay, is it my job? How can I help? How can I make, my neighbor's life better? How can I help them get a job? How can I help them help themselves? How do we turn to ourselves and try and help solve the problem before we ever get the government involved? And I'm not saying that doesn't mean we don't need a basic safety net and make sure that, that, like, I don't want people dying for lack of food in America, right? Like, that isn't what we should be doing. But I just want, whenever there's a problem, I want us to turn to ourselves and turn to it's Ezra Taft Benson again, right? I want to turn to God, our faith communities. I want to turn to our families, right? And trying to figure out where, our family, and then if we can't get it done there, and how can the country help, right? And I've always looked at it in that order of, like, how can we keep that in place? And I believe that's the Republican Party for me, is can we solve the problems that way? Because we're going to get better, longer lasting solutions, cultural solutions, if we go that route, rather than this route is filled with waste. It's filled with enforcement questions. It's filled with problems. It requires legislative bodies to meet and make rules and have all these laws that nobody can ever keep track of. I think all of that is the Democrat platform, and I want nothing to do with it.
Well, I completely agree with you there, because I think the problem is this, is on the Republican side, we want to teach people how to fish. And like you said, how can I help you get a job? How can I help you sustain and support yourself? How can I temporarily lift you up and so that you can progress on your own 2 feet? Whereas on the left, it's more, I want dependency. I want you to be voting for me. I want to stay in power. And so they're more for the handout. They're more for the socialism type aspect to it, because it keeps them in power. They want to fix the problem by creating dependence, by giving out the handout, by giving out the free stuff. And so their mentality, how they look at it, is completely different from us. Because we're looking at it as like, I don't care about the power. I just want to kind of help people where I can and just go on my merry way. I just want to let you live your life and me live my life, and I'll help when I can. But at some point, you got to be able to pick yourself up and take care of yourself. And I'm going to be there to help you do that. If you need job training, anything like that, let's create programs for that. It's a completely different mentality when you're earnestly trying to help somebody and help them help themselves versus the only vision you have is, I want power, I want authority.
Yeah.
The way I see getting that of power and authority is by creating problems and then haphazardly trying to fix the problems. But more importantly, I need people that are dependent on me and subservient to me, because that's the only way I stay in power. And so let's buy your vote. Let's give you some free stuff. Let's create that dependence, and then I'll stay in power forever.
Yeah. And I think that, unfortunately, that is a path to doom. Right? It's focused on power, and it's focused on control, and power and control are not tools of the Savior.
No, but the left don't believe in the Savior. That's the whole problem. Yeah, that's the whole
Bless
problem.
their hearts.
Bless their hearts, right? In the not so good way. Bless their
Somebody
hearts.
commented in a comment section somewhere, and to something that I said, and they posted a photo of, it said proof, and it showed the Bible, and then they had a picture of the Spider-Man book, and it said proof that Spider-Man exists. Now, that was really sad to me to think they equate those the same.
But I'm hopeful. Like, I'm seeing this youth resurgence in believing in God, and believe it or not, I'm with our framers of our Constitution, that a country that is built on Christian principles is going to be a better, more successful country than the alternative. And I'm hopeful. It is easy to see a country that loses that perspective. We don't have to look that far. Look at Europe.
Yeah.
That's where they started.
Completely said that a country that is not Christian, a country that does not have the values like that, the Constitution is completely insufficient part of to sustain the country, because you have to have a moral background. A piece of paper is not going to give you morals and values. You have to get that from a higher power.
Well, and that's, we started on this is we were just talking about getting in politics and all this other stuff. I will just say, I was growing up, like I said, parents got along. We lived in Missouri. They didn't get along. We lived in California. But, for me, when things didn't work out and we were living in California through high school, I was really fortunate. I had great men who cared about me and just stayed with me, and just worked to try and keep me involved in church, and just stayed active, stayed on me. And I had great, we'd go on campouts and did all the Boy Scout things, and they just were always reaching out to me and always inviting me. And I laugh. It's like I've got a book. It's not really a book, but I've got a chapter that I've carved out in my own story of like, here's the 10 men that I cobbled together how to be a man from, right? As the son of a single mom, if I ever had a book, it's a funny story. Well, we got long form, right? I can play a time. Uh, a funny story, when one of the times that my parents weren't working things out well, my mom packed up all our stuff and put us in a U-Haul truck and decided, we were going to move from one of the many times we moved from Missouri to California. I think this was actually the last time. I was in sixth grade. And she had packed all our stuff up, and my brothers and I were in, there's a bench seat in the U-Haul truck, and we're driving through the middle of no freaking where in New Mexico. And our U-Haul truck broke down. Okay. And so she's got 3 boys, and she's broke down in the middle of nowhere. And my mom, sorry, I won't get emotional. Anyway, she just is beside herself, because what is she going to do with 3 boys? And my youngest brother was 3 at the time, right? And so she's like, what am I going to do? I got a 3-year-old. I got, and it was a few miles walk to get to the next like call box, because we didn't have cell phones or anything. So my mom's like, all right, you boys, you've got to watch your brother. And, my brother, Pat, and I, like, we fight like crazy. But he's like, well, you got to keep an eye on your brother, and you got to stay in the truck, and, this whole deal. And we had some food, and we were there for, I don't know, maybe an hour or so. But one of us had, we had to use the restroom, because eventually it was like too much, right? So, and maybe this is too colorful for the show. You can cut it out if it is. But we all decided we would be safe if we just got out of the truck and we're boys, so we're just going to pee over on the side of the road, right? Well, we were right there, and we were just getting ready to pee, and this big wind comes out of nowhere right as we're peeing, and the pee blew all over us. We were just covered. So first we get the water, right? Because the pee covers us. And then you get the dirt that's in the wind covers us, right? And so when my mom got back to the truck, we're covered in piss and dirt. And my mom looked at this, and I will never forget the look on her face. She was so distraught, like, what happened? And I've always joked that I tell you all that because, if I ever write a book, which I probably never will, but I wanted to title it Pissing in the Wind because of that story. Just, and this idea of trying to cobble together what it means to be a good dad, to be a good, person, to be a good citizen, to be a good, just all those things. You cobble it together from your community. And, mine were just 10 great men who contributed it to my life in very meaningful ways to help me get my moral compass. And I've honestly, their association just made me better.
Well, I like that story. Well, that's totally staying in.
I'm looking at it as a mom thinking, just when you think it couldn't get worse.
Yeah, exactly. And she's trying to fix problems, and more problems just keep occurring. You just got to keep going one problem at a time, right? Just say, what else is next, right? What else is next? I just got to keep going. You keep the motivation going. Well, let's get into a few of the things that you've been able to accomplish here. So one of the things that you did was...
What is it with my pictures, by the way? I always look like I'm about to, like, eat, like, a small puppy or something. Like, why do the newspapers always get me in these grouchy-looking faces? Anyway.
It looks like
I
a
swear, when I
determined
look
face
in
to
the
me.
mirror,
I like the
that.
determined look on that picture. It's good with me.
That's probably true.
But one of the things you got and put forward was
the Sundance
bill
deal
to eliminate the LGBTQ flag from schools and public buildings, which we all completely approved, and it looks like it went through Congress pretty quickly. We spoke about it with a few of the people within the House. Everybody liked this bill that you just can't have any of that in the schools. The schools are not a place to indoctrinate kids. And it went clear down to where they can't even have the pins now. You can't even have pins. You can't have anything as a teacher to promote one thing over the other. And I think that was the point of the bill. I don't remember who we were talking to that passed it, but the whole point of the bill was that teachers and anybody else could not elevate any social group above the other, which is part of the flag bill. But as we can see from here, Sundance didn't like the bill, so they're a little more California, a little more woke, and they said, well, because of this bill, we're leaving town. And my painting of that is bye.
And I think if you scroll down, it shows my tweet, which was basically, a reference to a movie a little bit higher, I think. I was like, bye, Felicia.
Yeah, bye, Felicia.
Which is a reference to, an 80s movie with Ice Cube in it. And it's, which was, and it was an independent film. So most people don't get some of the nuance of that joke. I apologize to everybody who looks at my Twitter account. Okay. I apologize. You get a glimpse into my sense of humor because unfortunately things I think are funny are not really that funny to other people. My wife has to remind me of this all the time. My favorite jokes are ones that take months or years to play out. I love a really long joke. I love long stories, and so as you can tell, but I just love long jokes. And things that have subtle like nuances to something. So the funny thing about that tweet is it was from an independent film that was a film show hit or a film festival hit, and that line by Felicia was spoken by Ice Cube to this gal they didn't like or whatever, and Chris Rock is in it, and the joke is I was using an independent film line to say goodbye to an independent film festival that didn't represent Utah's values or whatever, right? And Felicia had gone and was like, she had come up to Ice Cube and Chris Rock in the movie, and she wants to borrow their car. And he's like, he doesn't trust Felicia, and there's a lot of reasons, but that's a whole other issue. And that's the other part of this joke is I feel like Sundance was constantly showing up and wanting to borrow our car. And if you look at the film incentives and the incentives they'd had, they've been receiving incentives for years in Utah. And, had the Park City venue, and Park City had built a lot of things around Sundance, and so had, others. And so the idea that they were showing up one more time and asking us to borrow our car again when they had not been that great with the car in the past, I just thought that whole joke played out. But I'm really the only one I think that got it.
No, that's brilliant. That was brilliant.
And then it goes even but the problem was, and then I go into reasons why, but Sundance really had started promoting material that was anti-family, anti-God, and anti-Christian. And that's been going on for years at Sundance. And I get it. It's art, right? So art always pushes boundaries. It always challenges society. I get it. And there's a role for art and there's a role for artists, right? But there isn't a public money contribution or subsidy for that art that does those things, right? For example, Banksy has a painting a couple of paintings actually in Park City around where Sundance is held usually. And Banksy's this famous artist, and he makes these commentaries through his art. Well, he just did one recently about freedom of speech on the side of the courthouse in London. Okay. And he did it right on the outside because they were banning speech. And, it was a judge basically gaveling or beating a constituent with their gavel. And he's saying, that was the crux of his painting. But Banksy is like this anonymous person, and nobody knows who it is, and they don't get any public subsidy for it. Sometimes they're damaging public property actually to do it, but that's edgy. Like, that's pushing boundaries. That is not publicly funded art, right? Publicly funded art, on the other hand, is where Sundance is getting a subsidy. We're laying out all these government contributions to make sure that they can, feel welcome in Utah. You should hear, bless their hearts, the folks in, that work on our tourism side of things, or that work in chambers of commerce. They were so mad at me for this tweet because it got so much public attention. And I understand now, looking back, they wanted Sundance to say no because they felt like Sundance was going to say no to the subsidy that we were offering them anyway, that I was begrudgingly, that we did through our legislative process. But they were going to say no anyway, and they didn't want to give them low-hanging fruit. So the flag bill got in the way a little bit. And then when they started like, the flag bill is, a bad thing, then the Chamber of Commerce and, the other folks were a little bit like stressed because now it's becoming about that issue that drives them away. And I don't know if you remember the outdoor rec show that shows up
The outdoor retailer
in
show.
Utah. Yeah, outdoor retailers. For a while they're like, well, we're leaving because, you're not woke enough here in Utah, yada, yada, yada. And they kept finding reasons to be upset about it. And everybody was constantly tiptoeing about outdoor retailers leaving and then, not coming back. And I just think, we should not be kowtowing or incentivizing that type of behavior in Utah.
This is Uriah Kennedy from God and Country, and I've been fishing since I was a little kid. My father used to take me out there and teach me how to tie the knots to get my lure on the end of that line, and then cast it into the stream or in the local lake that we were fishing at. There are very few things in this world that are more relaxing and more fun than getting out on the water and pulling in a big fish. In order to have that type of success that you want, to be able to get out there with your kids and be able to have them have that success, or not get skunked yourself, you have to have the best equipment. We all have known and trusted Rapala from the time we were little kids. Rapala has the best lures and the best equipment that you could possibly buy. Trust Rapala in all these needs, and go to Rapala by using the link that is on our description, or QR code that's going to be popping up on your screen. Again, you must use the link in our description or the QR code that's popping up on your screen. Trust Rapala for these fishing needs. Again, any type of lures, tools, knives, clothing, and apparel that you will need, you can go to Rapala and get those needs taken care of. Enjoy the water and enjoy being out there with your kids, and be successful at the same time, because there's nothing like getting skunked, but there's nothing more joyous than pulling in that big fish. So trust Rapala for those fishing needs, and go to Rapala right now using the link in the description, the QR code that's popping up on your screen, and thank you for supporting our channel. I don't think we should be kowtowing at all, because that's exactly how they want to control red states and conservative people and Christians. Our values do not change. They do not bend. As a Christian, I mean, abortion is evil. I do not support the LGBTQ community pushing anything on kids or pushing their values on anything in society. If you want to be LGBTQ, then go live your life and do what you want to do. But you can't push that on others, and that's exactly what they want to do. And so, in order to keep Sundance's business, or to keep the outdoor retailers business, or there's a lot of other movies that are done here in the state, they say, well, we're going to let you, or we're going to stay here under these conditions. And there's a lot like what the federal government did, and what Cox would do is anytime that the federal government wanted like the school district to do something like that, they would hold the money over like a carrot and say, okay, in order to get this money, you've got to kowtow to these policies. You got to have a mask mandate, or you got to have these other things. And I don't agree with any of that. You cannot hold my values hostage because you want to subvertively crush them. essentially, and
Yeah.
turn our
Well-
red state into something that's blue state. So I don't agree with anything. That's why when I
Yeah.
tell people that Sundance is leaving and I say, well, bye, they're like, well, that's kind of cold. I'm like, no, what is cold is them trying to push their values on top of me. If they want to be Sundance and just do their thing up there and be a part of society and just let us be Christians and let us have our values and they do their thing, we do their thing, great. They're welcome in this state. But the second they try to be intrusive like that and hold their business hostage and try to hold something over our head, that's where I draw the line. That actually infuriates me. Honestly, I'm like, no. I get really upset with the federal government for the same reason. Which is why I like Trump's efforts to try to push the Department of Education back to the states, because I don't want them holding anything over our head. I don't want them at all ever being able to use money as a carrot or manipulation, essentially, to say, no, you have to have these
But they know
policies
it's
or
our
else.
they know it's our weakness. I mean, this is the thing. They know it's our weakness as Republicans, right? Is they know the way to our weakness is a mess of pottage. You remember the story of Esau,
Yep.
right? Got the birthright and it's stirred, it's his. He doesn't have to do it. Just have to wait his turn and he's going to get the birthright. Like the double portion of the inheritance, he's getting it. Everybody else is going to split what's left. Okay. And what does Esau do? He's offered a bowl of pottage, and that becomes symbolic for generations of anything that we would set between us and the things that God wants for us. And that mess of pottage is something that is different for everybody at any time. But I will say the one weakness that we Republicans tend to sell ourselves down the river for is economic prosperity. And sometimes we will trade that mess of pottage or trade for that mess of pottage what is our birthright. And I think that's the thing from a principled standpoint that I struggle with when I'm on the Hill or when I'm dealing with some of these issues, I deal with issues. Because at the end of the day, if you haven't read Mere Christianity or you haven't read Screw Tape Letters by, C.S. Lewis, the best way to get to hell is carefully through compromise.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I think a big
Right,
part
and
of it too is we as Christians, we just want to be very accepting. We want to bring all people in. We don't want to be judgmental, and we try to overtly and go too far with being accepting and trying to bring everybody into the fold and kind of outwardly demonstrate that we're these loving, kind people, these Christian people that just want to accept everybody into the fold. And sometimes we bend the values. And there's a lot of, I see politicians doing it. I see a lot of just lay people just out there just bending the rules, bending their values, bending their morals, because they're just trying to go too far with how accepting they are. There's one thing where you can be accepting of the people and loving of people, but hold a very, very hard line as to what my morals and values are. I'm perfectly okay with accepting you as being gay or being lesbian and you getting married to another gay or lesbian person. I don't care. That's your business. Go ahead and go get married. I don't think that should be outlawed. But where I draw the line is you cannot push that on our kids. You cannot push that in the schools. You cannot force me to use your pronouns. You cannot force me to do anything. Those are mine. And the second you try pushing that on somebody else is where I draw the line. And people are like, well, that's kind of being judgmental. You're not being so accepting. I'm like, no, you're free to do what you want to do, but my morals and values are not bending. And you can do you and I can do me.
Yeah. And I think that's one thing that's frequently misunderstood is just because you got like a whole mess over there, or whatever it is, and just because I don't want to be part of it, that doesn't mean I don't respect your right to have a mess over there, right? Like that's individual determinism, right? That is your ability to make your decisions for yourself. Like that's your mess. The problem is your mess stops being your mess when it comes like into my area, right? And that's where it's like, okay, I'm putting tax money, my property taxes are paying for schools for my kids, right? And even after my kids are out of school and they've graduated and moved on to like universities or they have jobs or whatever, my house, when I sell it to somebody, it might be a young family that moves in, they want access to schools. And so I've got to make sure those schools stay open so I continue to contribute tax money for that purpose. But I would never, ever expect that I could contribute money to a system that would teach a program that is completely amoral, right? And isn't proud to be American, isn't interested in America first, isn't, now, they shamed us forever to get rid of the words American exceptionalism. But man, as you look around this world, it is easy to see how much better we're doing than everybody else. And it's not even close, right? But they want to phase those things out so that we don't develop, xenophobia or racism or whatever it is, like whatever their programming is. But really what they're trying to do is they're trying to make it so that the real success of a Christian nation, or the real success of a nation that respects the religion of others, because, Muslims can be respectful, Hindus can be respectful, like the idea that can exist without war, without poverty, without famine, without, all those things. They don't believe it, because outside in the rest of the world, that's what they're fighting over. They're drawing their lines and their national lines over religion. Here, we are trying our best to make it work with everybody here by respecting those boundaries. But if you think for a second that you're going to come in and program our kids to believe in, in a godless society, which is what it feels like most of it is, and that really in that absence of religion, right? That idea that there's no religion that should be taught by the state, or there's no religion involved in the state, or those kinds of things, or there's no morality involved in the states. That idea in and of itself existing in our schools is another form of religion. It's like the mirror image of religion. And that's the problem, is they think that no religion in the classroom is the place to be, when at the end of the day, they've created a mirror image of religion that is it's in its own way, it's its own corrupt belief system, because it doesn't lead people back to God. And because it's corrupt, and because it's the religion of the secular education world, because of all of that, right? That then becomes really a death spiral for a society. And so we've got to be able to now, and I will say this too, that doesn't mean we need to have Bible reading in our classroom. That doesn't mean, we don't need to have worship period. We don't need to have a state-sponsored religion to say, this is what it is. What I do think, though, is you can't be working so hard at home to teach your kids the gospel and then send them to school for longer than they're at home, okay? Send them to school for 8 hours, where they then work to deprogram them, or trying to desensitize them, or even worse, corrupt what their parents are trying to teach them at home.
Well,
and that to me is a problem.
Well, the big issue is a lot of them are purposely trying to desensitize the kids because they have an animosity against religion. They have an animosity against values. And then you get people at higher in value where the goal is even more sinister, because they know if they can get rid of religion completely, if they can replace religion, like you were saying, have the opposite effect, that is what socialism and communism is where the state is the religion. There is no God, because the state is the high power, is the highest authority. They don't like a religious population, because in a religious population, your authority is higher than the state. Your value system is higher than the state, and they don't want anything higher than that. They want to be the ultimate authority, or else it isn't socialism, it isn't communism. So you have a group of people that are completely against religion and not necessarily caring about socialism and communism, but then you've got a group of people that have a solid goal to turn this country socialistic or communistic. And we're seeing that with Mamdani. We're seeing that with Ocasio-Cortez and a few others. They want to replace religion with the state. It's all about power and authority and control.
Oh, it makes sense when you go back to what we were talking about earlier, where the Democrats' primary solution is the government. That's because that's who their God is.
Yeah, exactly. That is who their God is.
Right. And so because their God is the government, that's where they turn for their solutions. On the right, the Republican side, our God, we have God, right? And he's amazing. And so it's easy for us to know that that's the solution and the direction ahead. And it's also why we distrust the government's inclusion into our lives.
Part of your flag bill kind of stems into a couple of other bills that I want to put out here that we can discuss.
You're not going to bring up the state flag, are you?
Yeah. No.
Hey, you guys, okay, hold on. Your reaction right there is you're totally missing it. Okay. And I'm going to give this for my conservatives. I'm going to give you this for my conservatives. Okay. Just for a second. I am a 10th Amendment guy. Okay. Now, have you ever looked at the old state flag?
Yeah.
Yep.
Anytime.
Okay. What is on the old state flag?
Our seal.
Seal.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. What's on the seal though?
Isn't it Orbis Unum?
You got okay. That's great. Okay. Did you know that there were 60% of people in Utah thought a bear was on our flag? There's no bear.
There's no bear.
80% thought there was a seagull. No, it's an eagle. Right? We had a lot of people who thought stuff was on our flag that wasn't there. So one, we did not have a lot of people that knew about the flag, right? Number two, at the end of the day, most of the symbolism from the old flag is borrowed from federal symbolism.
Yes, it was.
Okay? The shield, the American flag, the eagle, all those things. There's nothing wrong with being American. But if you'll think back to 1896, okay? Remember, in 1896, what were the saints who settled here in this valley? What were they dealing with? In 1895, the Emmons-Tucker Act passed Congress, which dissolved the church as an organization, the LDS Church, took away all of their real estate and imprisoned leaders that were engaged in polygamy. Okay? So that was 1895 when we're coming up with this statehood petition. And at the end of the day, in 1895, we're coming up with a state seal and petitioning the federal government so that we can be a state in 1896. We came up with a state seal that is covered in federal symbols. The American flag, the eagle, stuff. Why? Because the pioneers were trying to convince the Americans that they were American enough. And believe it or not, they didn't reestablish the church until 1897. We were a year in statehood before they restored the church to its incorporation and gave the church back its property, including the Salt Lake Temple. You go through all of that, and you realize that our seal created in 1896 was actually a plea from the pioneers begging to be American for their lives. And then when you think about that for just a moment, all that I was looking to do as a 10th Amendment guy with the new state flag is establish a flag that is 100% about Utah. That's all it is. And so the federal symbols left, right? Now we kept red, white, and blue because those are the most popular colors. We have the red rocks, we have the blue skies, we have our white mountains. It fit perfectly. But everything on it is Utah. The beehive is 300% bigger than it was before. And it's not surrounded by anything else. It is its own thing, the beehive. And the other thing, there's hexagons all over the flag. The mountains are actually hexagons. The whole thing can be made out of hexagons. But the one thing about hexagons that's amazing is it is the strongest naturally occurring shape in nature. And I will say this, when you're trying to make a statement about who Utahns are, what I wanted that flag to say is that we are badass strong. And so you can mock it for, people said it was woke for coming up with a new state flag, that kind of stuff. At the end of the day, all I did was free us from our federal overlords, worshiping,
I think
and,
the
and, and
problem that most people had with it, and I only
yes,
can discuss the group of people I was discussing, is that one, in a time in the economy where we were at, the cost; two, that it wasn't brought before the people for them to choose whether we wanted to do that or not first. And
fair.
that was the main problem. I think then once you have an animosity towards an idea because you feel like your freedom or your consideration your opinion wasn't asked, then the rest of it comes out where they're like, that's ugly, and that, looks
Yeah.
like this other one that looks woke, and that kind of thing.
So
But
the cost, you're right. I wish I could have done it for free.
well,
Because at
and
the
I
end of
just
the
look at
day,
every business that had to take down, like every business has to go retire their flags, and they had to go purchase new flags, and
but they don't. But they don't, because we kept both flags, right? Like one is the historic state flag and the other one is the new state flag, and they're both in code and they're both state flags. So we left them both. In fact, most businesses didn't. But I'll tell you this: if it's an outside flying flag, right?
Mhm.
Those flags only last about 30 days in the Utah winds, and so those things rip and tear apart. Nobody had to replace anything that they weren't going to replace anyway. But that's the cost. The 500,000, I think, is what it finally came down to be. The crazy thing is, well, we waste millions every year on tourism advertising. So I took $500,000 from the tourism advertising and spent it on the flag, and the flag was public opinion polls. That's what actually cost the most, is we did 3 public opinion polls, and those are really expensive to do, especially on a statewide large sample perspective. And so that was, one part of it. And if I would have reduced the cost, I would have known less going into it. Like, we would have known less about like what people wanted. So, the cost is, but, granted, it costs money. The only other thing, when people say they wanted like a vote, right? Well, my problem with that mentally is that I believe strongly in the principles of a republic. And there is this push by the Democrats to push everything to a popular vote. We want a popular vote for everything. They want a popular vote for the president, so they want to get rid of the electoral college. They want a popular vote for U.S. senators, 17th Amendment. That was the stupidest thing we did as a nation, was have the 17th Amendment, which made the popular election of U.S. senators. And while there was corruption in the old process, there's different corruption in the new process. And unfortunately, nobody will ever vote to give away their vote. But I will tell you, the federal government is completely unmoored from state accountability. And the reason they're completely unmoored from state accountability is because the U.S. senators, are no longer accountable to their state legislatures. And so at the end of the day, we've completely done away with it. And now it's a giant popularity contest. And I'll just go back and say, if everyone thinks we're just better off using these ridiculous smartphone devices as a call-in system for voting on policy or voting on issues, I will tell you that is a one-way path to destruction. We cannot survive as a democracy. Ben Franklin said, right as he walked out of the Philadelphia Hall, what does he say in Independence Hall? So lady asked him on his way, what do we get? What did you give us? And his response, a republic if you can keep it. And why? There's no way Ben Franklin knew about smartphones or how easy it was, or the fact that in one day we would get more information in our brains than a pioneer settler would get in most of their adult lives, right? That was never a consideration back then. But we will lose our republic, and we will lose that representative element if what we do is we start voting on things that, in my opinion, a flag is completely immaterial. It is not important. I know it seems important, but it really isn't, compared to the millions in taxes and everything else and all the other issues that go on at the state. There's so many other more important things. And I get a flag, and I will say this just because, if somebody says, well, hey, how should I build this house? And they're going to look at you like, I don't know, man. You just like start building it, grab some wood, and maybe some metal and like get to work, right? Like that's people that aren't in construction, that's what they're gonna say. But you know what you can do? Well, what color should I make it? And they'll give you an opinion there. Know why? It's easy to have opinions on it, right?
Of course.
Now, I do not know how the flag would have done in a vote, right? Mississippi did a vote their first time when they did their flag to remove the Confederate flag, and I think that's so underlying some of this is also, I will add to it. You mentioned time. The other part of it was, you know, you said time and cost, right?
Well, the number one being that people were like, why didn't nobody ask me? And they're, you know,
Oh,
you
yeah,
have a
and then
heart
voting,
and a
yeah.
love for something that represented you, you know, that flag, a lot
Right.
of people, yes, a flag shouldn't be above all these other important things. However, you have a love for it, and to not also
Have you
hear
ever,
after the fact.
have you or anybody else ever voted on the American flag? No, we don't vote on the American flag. We never voted on it. It's never been voted on. It's just history has gotten us there, right?
Mhm. But
And
because things evolved, we needed to include.
so how did we get our state flag? In 1903, the governor at the time needed a flag for the World Fair because they were celebrating the
right.
Louisiana
Remember that.
Purchase. And so what he did, he just threw the state seal on a blue bed sheet and took it over to the state fair because they didn't have time or interest in trying to design it. They were trying to provide for their families and everything else, right? So they did that so they could
Mhm.
participate in the World Fair. By 10 years later, everybody's like, well, we don't have a flag and everybody else is getting one, so let's just go with the one that's already out there. That's literally our flag process. We never designed a flag and we never vote on one. But I'll say the other element I do hear every once in a while, because you're right, people feel like they should vote on things, and I agree. That's a very popular
Yeah, they just
thing
want
to
to be
do.
included, especially, you know, when
Yeah,
you're
sure.
delegate minded. You want to be
Yeah,
included in the process.
no question. And that's why we spent $500,000 getting people included. But they wanted anyway. But the other part of it, I will say, is it came at a bad time. The timing turned out to be horrible. When we started on the process, President Trump was in charge, and everything was, nobody cared. When we created the committee, nobody cared. When we started working on designs, nobody cared, right? But then Joe Biden won election, and it's not the next day, but it felt like the day after that. People started tearing down statues of founding fathers and all this other stuff. And it wasn't too long after that we came out with the flag design.
That's a really good
and
point.
and everybody felt like, and I if I could have at the time been done with this when President Trump was still the president, it would have been fine. However, because the liberals were in the process of tearing down our heritage, our history,
Agreed. It felt more
I don't,
insulting.
it felt worse. Yep. And that's the only regret, is I just look back at the time and I'm like, man, how could we have done it differently? And it just came down to bad political timing. It's unfortunate that it costs money, and I believe in a republic, and I don't think voting a direct popular vote on anything is a good idea.
To be
Bless
honest
my
with you,
heart.
I never cared one way or the other for the flag. I think the new flag looks just fine, and I think they didn't have any opinion over the previous flag either. So when it came out, I'm like, oh, that looks good, and I just kind of moved on my merry way. And I think a lot of us did the same thing.
I'm not showing you the rest of my office where it's like literally everywhere in the rest of the room. So I focused it this way on purpose.
Well, you're bringing up some really, really good points about voting. And the one thing that most of us have massive pet peeve about and are just bitter and angry about is SB 54.
Oh yeah. I hate it too.
So we've talked to a lot of legislators about it and said, well, it could probably pass in the House,
I agree.
but it will die in the Senate.
Yes, it will die in the Senate.
So
A slow and painful death.
how do we fix that? I mean, you're in the Senate. How do we fix that? Is it just by voting in new senators. How do we fix SB 54? Because SB 54 is going to be the death of Utah if we keep this up. Because like you said, it's just going to be a popularity vote. It's going to be a popularity contest. It's already destroying our senators. Good thing we got Mike Lee in, but we get a lot of people going into office that should not be in office because of signatures. One of the things I learned growing up as a kid, and particularly in Scouts, was to be prepared. And particularly when it comes to my feet. You do not want to be out in a situation where your feet are incredibly uncomfortable and makes you absolutely miserable, makes the rest of the day absolutely miserable. So you have to go out there in the right equipment, whether that's hiking in the mountains, whether that's fishing on the stream, it's working out in your garden or out in the yard, or it's going out on the town or to the nearest rodeo in a nice pair of boots. You have to go out prepared so you look good, feel good, and most importantly, it is comfortable. Because again, there's nothing like being miserable walking around all day long. We want to introduce you to 3 different companies that are supporting this channel. We have Durango Boots, which provides the best Western wear and boots that money can buy. So you'll have the look, the feel that you want. There's also Rocky Boots for that great mountain wear, that hiking wear, and just getting out into nature and being prepared for what you're confronting. And then there's Mucky Boots or Muck Boots, which will provide the perfect waterproofing that you need for fishing, hunting, and again, getting out in the yard and working in the mud. These are great companies that supply a great pair of boots for you for any need, for any occasion. So again, go to the link in our description or click on the QR code that's coming up on your screen for any of these great sites, whether it's Western wear, whether it's the outdoor wear and getting up into the hills and the mountains, or whether it's muck wear that you need to be able to work around the garden or go fishing or hunting and not walk around it with wet feet. These are great products at great prices that will keep you perfectly comfortable all day at the same time that you're looking good. So trust these products, whether it's Durango, whether it's Muck Boots, or whether it's Rocky Mountain Boots or Rocky Boots, and go to those sites using the link in our description or QR code that's popping up on your screen. Again, the link in the description or QR code that's popping up on your screen, and support our channel.
Well, I have a couple of things. Obviously, I've thought long and hard about this. I mean, there were years until about 2021. Literally, I think 2021 was the last time. It was when I finally got some peace on the issue. But from 2014, when Senator Bramble and I passed the bill, to 2021, SB 54 was the last thing on my mind before I went to bed every night. and it was a haunting, feeling, trying to figure out what the future was, related to SB 54. The problem, okay, so going back in time, SB 54 was supposed to be this compromise, right? You had this citizens initiative that they said they had the signatures. We had different rules back then. People didn't have to turn in all their signatures until, at the very end. And we didn't have a process to remove signatures. It was, hey, if it's on the ballot, people can vote for it, right? Going back to our flag. I will just tell you from a popular democracy side, that was polling over 60% of Utahns, 60% of Republicans were going to vote for the Count My Vote bill. And the Count My Vote bill was go get 200 signatures as a senator and you're on the ballot. That's all it would take. 100 signatures for a House member. It was a percentage, but this is what the percentage worked out to be in the Senate districts. And it was 1,000 signatures for a congressional seat and 2,000 signatures for a statewide race. That was the process. And, all the polls showed that 60% of Republicans were ready to vote for it. The Democrats were all on board. So, I mean, the polling for that, while the flag may be unpopular, may not have done, who knows how that would have done with the ballot from a popularity standpoint. We know Count My Vote probably would have passed. And we were all under the assumption that we were celebrating, 2014, we assumed was the last year that we were going to have a caucus and convention system, period. Then the compromise, Senator Bramble is too clever by half. The compromise we came up with was we were going to take all the count my vote language, put it into a bill, and then create an exception to it. And that way, when the citizen initiative passed, all would say is, yes, the count my vote language is controlling, but if you, and it had a few criteria, and some of them, one of them I didn't really like, but I thought it was unconstitutional. And my plan with the whole thing was, well, great. Hopefully this whole thing is unconstitutional and gets thrown out, and off we go. The courts did not find it unconstitutional. They did find one provision of it unconstitutional, which was Senator Bramble's addition of allowing unaffiliated voters to vote in Republican primaries. It was not a great policy, but I thought that was, the parties have the right to say who votes in their primaries. And that was pretty clear case law. And I was hoping that that would be the pill that, that killed the bill. But last minute, Count My Vote figured out what we were doing, and they added a severability clause, yada, yada, yada. I could relive this like yesterday. You asked where we're going, or how do we get out of it? My recommendation to the party and to everybody else way back when was, guys, let's rally behind the convention candidate, and let's make sure that I was like, look, if every delegate put in $100, right, into a contribution and said, hey, it's $100 for every delegate, and you put those $100 in, and the convention candidate is going to get that as the war chest walking out of convention, right? Like, there's the party contributing 40 grand to, a U.S. Senate candidate. That's a huge number for mailers and, some of those things. I'm like, let's donate money, let's donate time, and let's make the candidates so that they have to go through the convention. Because if they go the other route, they're going to regret it. They're not going to have the grassroots. They're not going to have any of those things to make it better. And instead, what we've done is almost no money comes from the party for candidates, almost none. And delegates, when they're done with convention, most of the time pack up and don't pay attention to the race anymore, and don't talk to their neighbors about the race or tell them how great things are. And, at the end of the day, the convention candidate walks out of convention with no money, no grassroots support, and then they're just staring down the barrel of whomever the signature candidate is that is more popular and has money already, and probably has already hired staff so he can get some grassroots support. And so what ends up happening? Signature candidates started winning elections. And it wasn't until literally we have never had a statewide race where the eventual winner did not qualify via the convention until 2024. It took 10 years. Everyone, including congressional races, everyone had qualified via the convention path until 2024. Something changed about us, or about the races, or about the elections. I don't know exactly what to blame it on, but something changed such that we don't have the support, the grassroots support for getting our candidate elected out of convention. And that's on us as much as anything else. I will tell you this, I'll just, I got nothing to lose here. Long form, there's no way anybody's going to get through an hour and a half of me talking anyways. So I'll just say, one of the issues is that we have created a disincentive for working within the convention system. And it's because instead of conventions being this hoorah, we have an amazing state economically. We have a robust economy. We have, all these things. Instead, convention becomes a focus on the things we're doing poorly at, right? Like we're not doing great at some things and we can always do better and that kind of stuff. But instead of like focusing on things we've done well and asking how we're, going to improve them, it's our convention process, because it literally is the only election process, right? Because in a lot of races, it doesn't matter who the Democrat is. They're not going to win across the state. And so, we're so hyped up on holding elected officials accountable for being, whatever imperfect they may be. We're so busy holding them accountable that we're putting them in a situation where it's very unpleasant to be in the convention system. And as a result, they're just going to do signatures. I will tell you right now, of my Senate colleagues, I'm trying to think of all the people up for election next year. I think I'm the only one that is considering going convention only. The only one.
I know for a fact.
And they all think it's malpractice. And I will probably lose in convention. I've always gotten over 60% in convention, but I may lose in convention this next year, and it will be because of the issues of the flag. And for some people, that's just a deal killer, which I totally get it. That's the most important thing I've worked on. Then, okay, never mind the other successes, right? They want to get me out of office because of that. Okay, fine. Like, I get it. But just be aware that like I am one of my colleagues who thinks it's important to restore the convention process. And I am going to be held accountable for the flag in the convention process next year. And we will lose one of the last votes if somehow I don't get 40%, right? But I think we've done it to ourselves by attrition, and the chances of ever going back, it's becoming like Congress, right? Unfortunately, it's a convenient topic to talk about. It is not one that will be solved, unfortunately. And I will just add this one insult to injury. It is painful for me that this is where it's at, because I believe, and I ran a repeal bill in 2021, and I was this close, man, to getting that thing done. I was this close, but we didn't have the governor's support, and I lost votes over not having the governor's support. Governor Herbert didn't want to sign it, and there was a citizen initiative going on, and we were really fortunate that a guy by Dave Bateman stepped up and put money into a counter signature proposal, and they were able to get enough signatures removed. Otherwise, if Dave Bateman hadn't done that and it was on the ballot, the convention process would have been done in 2021 or 2020.
Which is very, very scary that it was that close to getting rid of the convention system.
That close. And so when I just say I would love to restore it. I'm all in. Like, I would do it. But when it used to be that most senators up for election were not using the signature process. As I've talked to most of my colleagues, I think they're all planning on it. And that's the bigger problem. So we can blame it on the senators. By all means, that's fine. Just remember that our senators are actually representative of people in your neighborhood, are in my neighborhood, everything else. And if we want to wholesale tip the ship over and find new ones, there's no guarantee you're going to get one that's going to want to not protect their own incumbency, because that's what the signature process has become, is protect incumbency. 1, 2, you don't have to stress with people yelling at you in convention. And trust me, I don't know if you were there at recent conventions, but everybody's yelling at me about the flag, right? Nobody wants to talk about the other things I've done. They want to yell at me about the flag. But you go through those things, right? And I see now, I think I'm down to 4. I might be at 6 votes for repeal in the Senate. And I track it closely, but I think I'm at 6. which is down, by the way, from 2021. So just in 4 years, 2021, right? I had 15 votes on second reading, and then the next day I only had 12 votes. So I lost 3, and I need 15 votes to get it over the hurdle. So I lost 3, couldn't get it through the Senate, right? But somehow I've gone now from 12 with largely the same group of, the same group of senators. I've gone from 12 down to 4 or 6. So I don't know what the problem is.
That's having that type of problems, because right now all it's done is it's become a money game, right? The senator has the most money and the most ability to advertise their name is the one that tends to win. And the other problem is there's now a lot of outside money is coming into our state because of it, because you're getting a lot of outside of the state donations that's helping people like Cox and others get into office through the signature process. And the other massive problem is as the newer generations rise and become voters, they have no idea, none of what the caucus system even is. I've talked to a lot of young voters, and they're like, what's that?
Mm-hmm.
Why isn't it just a popular vote? And they're all convinced in this popular vote, which is this nationwide swing that we're seeing across the
republic?
country to get rid of that. So
a republic, if you can keep it.
yeah.
And I will say the desire to have a direct vote on the flag, right? It is a symptom of the broader problem. The broader problem is we all think we know better than everybody else. And because of that, we don't trust anybody to make decisions for us. And so the way of a republic, a representative republic, it's really going to be hard to continue to hold on to it, because more and more people want what's popular. And this is where I get back to what I said earlier. I get it on the right. Like I got a ridiculous, I got a ridiculous lawsuit, like somebody's suing me and like others, and they're bragging about it on social media all over like SB 54. And it's like some, they're claiming it's a criminal conspiracy about like getting people elected. And I'm like, oh brother, if they only knew it like the push to have more and more popular vote stuff. And it's crazy. My far right Republican conservatives are the ones asking for a popular vote on the flag, and at the same time asking for a republic in the caucus convention system, right? The irony of the conflict of those principles is too hard for me to understand. And that's where, at the end of the day, I miss a principled Republican Party as opposed to as much populism as we have. And I'm hopeful that we will find a great, happy medium so that we can continue to thrive. Because I do think there are lots of merits to populism that principles might miss. And so, don't want to miss those, because I used to be more libertarian side of things, right? And I look at where I was 15 years ago, and I would not, back then I was probably more okay with, medical marijuana than I am today. I don't think that that's a good policy. But back when I first got elected, I was probably okay with it, because what's the government's role in natural, drugs and that kind of stuff? But that was back then. Now I can see where that could be a problem. And, from a principled standpoint, I can square that. But anyway,
Well, before you
SB
gotta
54 is hard
leave
for me, dude.
here in a few minutes, and we don't want to.
Oh yeah, why not?
We don't want to escape from the one important subject that everybody's asking about, and we're getting talked about. So, I mean, the excellent things that you've done in office are obviously the transgender flag is great. Your work on the abortion stuff is just phenomenal. But the one thing that we here at the podcast keep getting asked constantly is about the whole conspiracy behind Stuart Adams and this law that he passed to help his daughter-in-law, or I think it was his niece. Now, just so the audience knows, Stuart Adams was a neighbor of mine. He was, and I would see him every Sunday at church and everything like that. So I know the guy, very familiar with the guy, but he's not discussing this subject. So what's going on in the Senate about this subject, and does it have any merit as to what everybody's saying about it?
The problem is, okay, I get back to the principle of this, okay? The principle of lawmaking is you hear about a problem, okay? And you then wonder, is the outcome of that problem, is it the right result in the law? And if it is, great, we don't need to touch it, right? But if we hear about a problem and the outcome of the law is unjust, not right, any of those things, then we go back as lawmakers and we say, how do we fix it? And these problems come to us by constituents, right? Since we've been here, I've gotten 24 messages from, people that want solutions to a problem that's come up, right? And I'm sitting here trying to, they're probably the same person, but you get these messages and constituents reach out to you, and you got to, dig into it, and try and figure out, is that the just result? If not, how do we change the law to fix it, right? And that's how most stuff comes. I don't want to talk necessarily about President Adams' stuff specifically, other than to say he heard about a problem, he didn't like the outcome, he told another lawmaker about the outcome, but didn't necessarily talk about the granddaughter perspective to it, or the relationship to it. And so he talked to the other lawmaker. The other lawmaker is a lawyer, has experience in criminal justice and some of those things, and works on criminal justice bills. So he said, hey, would you look at this and see if this is the right outcome or result, right? And he said, yeah, I think we should fix this because we have a different standard for kids that are still in high school, but one turned 18 and one, is younger than 18, right? And that different standard doesn't feel right while they're in high school. So maybe we come up with a standard that if they're all in high school, we treat all the high school kids the same. And he made the policy argument, talked through, the appropriate authorities, and that's the policy, right? So he comes up with that law, and that passes. And I didn't think it was a big deal because I knew nothing about the relationship and I knew nothing about the other. I didn't think it was a big deal, and it didn't really strike me as that odd because it fit into the way we usually get ideas for bills or issues. The problem comes in some ways. It's like, okay, what would I have done differently? If President Adams told us all about this relationship and this criminal charges, and he says, hey guys, I want to make this law backward looking so that we make sure that my relation doesn't get the penalty that's coming to them, right? So if he's the president and he says, hey, I want to make this backward looking, that's going to be an uncomfortable conversation for all of us, but I'm pretty sure that the policy would have changed through the legislative process such that, it wouldn't have been backward looking.
But
wouldn't have passed,
wouldn't the
things.
appropriate thing would have been to disclose that up
That's
front?
the thing. I think it's a power dynamic when this is just me. But when the Senate president puts his finger on the scale on an issue, it upsets the power on that issue. And in some ways, it might put too much focus on an issue more than it deserves. Because if he did disclose, then would we consider the policy dispassionately, right? And I don't know that we would or wouldn't, but I think we know when the Senate president really wants something to get done. You'll see stuff gets done just because President Adams wants to get something done.
That's my understanding, and I've had I've got quite a few sources in both the House and the Senate who feel like they can't speak out without a threat of not only their elected position but their professional position, and that's really disturbing to me.
But that's like all those things. I can't speak to those because I don't feel the same way. President Adams and I have disagreed in public. We have disagreed in caucus. We've disagreed in several occasions. We've had yelling at each other in different times, right? And you live next to him, so he does. You're not a guy that is typically known to yell at people, right? But he and I have had heated conversations, but I've never once felt threatened or worried about my job or my position in the legislature or like, so I don't understand those concerns, right? And maybe that's just me. That's just not me. But I feel badly if they do. And if any of my colleagues are listening to you feel like it, come talk to me. Like, I'm happy to help build a bridge on where you feel like the concern might be. But what I say is, because he didn't say anything, the policy has to stand on its own. Does that make sense? And if he had said something and then people were voting for it for the wrong reasons, I think that's worse. And that's the debate I've had about this issue. Is I can see it both ways, and I still think it would have been worse if he didn't disclose it, right? But they did make the law backward looking. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Like, if they had backdated it so that it was just before the crime occurred, like, to me, I would have been offended, angry, and calling for President Adams to resign if that was the process. If he didn't disclose it and he made it backward looking. But because he didn't disclose it and it only applied to future crimes, the fact that the judge then afterwards listened to, the attorney who helped draft the bill, the fact that he listened to them, that though is the judge taking notice and trying to figure out, okay, where's this policy at and how do we strike this right balance? I do not believe that a young person at the age of 18 should be on the sex offender list for the rest of their lives. I don't know. The 13, like, the age is such a problem and such a struggle. And I'm being way too open here, but I just getting rid of those facts for a minute. I struggle with, I just don't think, knowing now what I know and going back to the teenager conversation from before, I just don't think teenagers make good decisions. And even at 18, I think they are capable of voting. I think they're capable, because that's it's a process, research, those kinds of things. But I just don't know that they're great at impulse control.
Yeah, I agree, and I appreciate
wasn't
your
good at
point
that.
of view, and I appreciate your transparency of that. But I feel like sometimes the focus then was not on the victim.
But remember, in the sentencing phase, nothing in the sentencing phase of a criminal trial is ever going to repair what happens to the victim.
True.
Right? Like, that's the crappy thing.
But we believe in justice, and
absolutely, that's right. And so it's like, how do you strike that balance, right? That you respect the justice, and at the same time, make sure that this person, when the justice has been served, how do you make sure that they can be productive individuals after that, right? And trying to find that balance, I will say, that is the hardest part. It is easy to pass a law and say this is what things should be. I think it's much harder to be a judge and actually get that balance right. But that's just me. I just think it's hard. I've been way too transparent. You're probably,
Well, I mean, a lot of people don't understand this.
I'm going to get in
the
trouble,
law
I'm
was
sure, from
passed
somebody.
that could have benefited his niece. I think it was his niece.
it was his granddaughter.
Well, granddaughter, niece, or something like that. But yeah, like you said, the law wasn't passed retroactively, so the law itself did not affect that family member. What affected it was the judge looking at the law, saying, well, if this law is going to be from now forward, and then the judge made the judgment call to affect the niece, and the judge is what made that decision. And people are going to,
And judges, believe it or not,
Have the freedom to do
not listen to Senator Adams. They do not listen to President Adams. They don't listen to Senator McCay. They don't listen to any of us, as we have seen over the recent few months. Like, that judge could have easily said, well, yeah, that's not the law. Sorry, I'm going this direction. You know what I mean? Like, he went a direction and did, did whatever with the sentence. But I feel like it would have been worse if he had disclosed it to the public, because now it draws this huge,
well, like you're
this
saying, it
huge
draws a dark
focus on the
shadow
squirrel.
over the top of the legislation. And it would
Yeah, and that's why I think an overabundance of caution when we are in those positions,
Yeah.
we should really do our best to avoid that.
Yeah.
I-
And maybe he
I-
could
I
have
fully agree.
waited a season and done it the following season or something like that, and not done it around that. But then the judge wouldn't have called it the way he called it either. So there's a lot of things that
It's
would have
tough.
changed around there.
What do you guys like? Okay, so you've heard my thoughts on it, right? That I'm probably going to hear, I'm going to get a nasty no from somebody. What do you guys think? Like, after that, what is better for a lawmaker? Like, let's say it's me and I'm trying to, deal with it. It's somebody, some relation of mine. How do I deal with that in the future?
Well, the collusion that I have seen after the fact, now that has come about, and the tactics that President Adams has performed, I've seen text messages and emails in private that are from him, and I'm rather disgusted, and I think he should step down.
And see, I don't know that side of it. I'm very aloof, and I have not felt any pressure on the issue. But now that I've spoken publicly on, a podcast, I'll probably hear about it. But I doubt from President Adams. I think, I just think I've thought back. It's like, how do you walk that?
Well, frankly, my
narrow
opinion is
window?
because I'm seeing your side and I'm seeing his side as well. So I think you're right that the fact that he didn't disclose it didn't put a cloud over the legislation. And as long as throughout that legislative process he wasn't overtly putting his thumb on it, and only the senators would know whether he put his thumb on that one or not. But the fact that it wasn't passed retroactively, I think it clears him from a lot of that, where he didn't put his thumb on it, and it didn't affect his family members. So I think up to that point, how it was handled was good. But the way he went wrong is what Ingrid is saying, is what happened afterwards. He should have just come out with full disclosure. He should have been a little more forthcoming with talking about
Denied
it.
having anything to do with the writing of it, that he wasn't the one that
And then you're
Here's
trying
the-
to throw his weight around afterwards, and he should have just played humble and just said, yeah, well, I was trying to keep my position out of the bill, and he could have shown out how he kept his position out of the bill. But I think what was wrong, and again, I know the guy, went to church with him every Sunday for a long time, is he got angry about it, and people calling him out on it, and he kind of got offended by it. And if he would have left the emotions out of it, I think he would have handled it much better.
it's a good point.
Because he's a great guy at church. He's a great guy in the ward we're in, and
Yeah.
I love the guy. But he didn't keep the emotion out of it, and I think that's what really turned people off. And he could have handled it.
I will just say this, and
Post-bill,
we
but
didn't
much
talk about this, Uriah, but and Ingrid, I appreciate you guys is willing to look at it objectively that way, because I don't know about you guys, but I get attacked online all the time, right? And for one reason or another, and I
Well,
certainly
to be
open
frank,
myself
we do
up
too.
for
You
it.
should see our comment section. So
Yeah. Okay. Good. So, but I'd say like, but I'll say this, like, when you're getting, if you get attacked and people are coming at me for one thing or another, like, I'm okay with that, right? Like, I can deal with that. It's about me, right? That's fine, and I think I'm fair game. But I will tell you, many people cross the line, and they do it. Our families right? Just because we're elected. Somebody has to be elected. We need 104 people to serve in the legislature, okay?
Of course.
We just need them. And if you came to me and it was your grandkid and you had this issue, I would handle it the same way, right? I would go through the bill process and I would diagnose the problem. Hopefully I can come up with a similar solution or whatever it might be. And I would do it the same way. And the last thing I would do though, is I would never march your kid or your grandkid up to the Capitol and say, hey, this is the rapist. I would never do that, right? This is the kid that you need to change, because it would bring a huge spotlight that is undeserved on your kid. And I will say this, our families as legislators suffer enough. I know everybody thinks there's like these privileges that go along, right? There aren't, okay? They just don't exist. I get traffic tickets. I found out the other day I had an unpaid parking ticket, so I had to go pay that. My son, got a parking ticket here in the city. Like, it just, I the same crap you guys are dealing with in your lives, I get to deal with. The difference is when I get a death threat, it's the police that are in my driveway and escorting my kids to school. It's not the same. And I will just say, the intolerance or like the toughness on our kids or our grandkids or our relations because of who they are related to is wrong. They should not feel intimidated. They shouldn't feel special. I'm telling my kids all the time, I'm like, look, and I've told them, I said, look, your last name is McCay. You got a giant magnet that is painted on your front and on your back. It said they're coming for you, right? Just because your last name is McCay. And it happens all the time. I've seen it in my wife's election where people are just, the Democrats are rallying like crazy. The anti-flag people are rallying like crazy. And they're yelling at her and calling her all these things that are crooked and stuff. I'm used to being called crooked. I'm not crooked. But I'm used to it, right? Like I know that they're venting at the government, not necessarily at me, and I don't take it personally. But I tell you, when it's my family, it is very hard for me.
I hear you.
Right? I hear you.
I will tell you this in closing, like I never once as a kid got into a fist fight over me. Every single fist fight I got into was over my little brothers, when somebody was picking on them. Of course, I picked on them all the time, and that's fine, right? But nobody messes with my family, right?
Yeah.
And I can just say, I would hope, Ingrid, I will just ask for grace for President Adams and his family. I do not know what it's like to deal with that issue in my family, and I pray that I never do. But I hope that a spotlight that bright never shines on one of my kids because of the legislative process. And so in that way, I can sympathize, and I feel like he handled it the right way, even though it doesn't sound very good from a PR standpoint. And I can't do anything about, the text message or emails. Like, I'm shadow boxing at that point because those opponents aren't in front of me. But what I can tell you is I hope that none of us are judged by our worst moments in life. And I will say that was probably a very tough moment for an individual who is very private and is very humble, in my opinion. That had to be a tough moment for him and all of that stuff. So that's my defense. Probably way too long-winded. I'm certain.
Not at all. Not at all. We so appreciate you being.
Yeah, like I said, I completely agree with him. I know the guy like the guy. Like, again, if he ever listens to this, he knows me very well. So, again, my opinion is that I think up to passing legislation, I think he handled it just fine. I think the problem was, like you're saying, his family got attacked, and then his feathers got standing up in the back of his head, and he didn't handle it very well afterwards, and he should have just stayed humble and been full disclosure afterwards, and he wasn't full disclosure and did stay humble afterwards. The other big bad taste in everybody's mouth is the age difference. If 18 and 13-year-old is a problem. If it was a 16-year-old or a 17-year-old, I don't think anybody would have been saying anything. But the fact
I'm not
that
going to
it
get
was
into
a
the facts.
13-year-old, that's the problem. Is people are thinking that they're protecting somebody that should not have done something with a 13-year-old.
But the individual
advantage
still,
that they do have,
didn't she still get a felony
advantage that they
charge?
do have is the offender was female. If the offender was male,
There'd be no question.
This would have been really
But
bad.
that just shows you, you know, the crazy thing is, I think girls at 18 should have better impulse control than boys at 18, right?
Right,
And
but we're
so-
not perfect.
No, well, I don't know. I've got some great. I don't know. I'm not saying anything. What, but I'm not going to get into the facts other than to say, like, it is tough for, you know, it's certainly tough in looking at it in retrospect. And I am still trying to figure out how you handle it differently. And maybe, Uriah, you offered the right bridge, which is stay humble and not get emotional. I will just tell you, in my experience, that is super
hard, especially when it's your family. I mean, I would have understood if it was like his kid, but it was a little more distant than that. Then, I mean, if I was a dad and my feathers got stood up, I mean, I could have totally understand that. But he needed to have kept some distance there, and he didn't do that. But I'm hoping to have him on I've texted him back and forth because I've got his number. I've texted back and forth, and he's saying that he wants to come on to the podcast, and he's just not committing to a date yet. And I've talked to his staff a few times as well. So hopefully sometime in the future we can have him on, and he can just disclose whatever he feels comfortable in disclosing, and hopefully that helps the public. So, I mean, that's my opinion. But getting back to you, again, I love the bills he put forward with the flag. I think the flag bill was perfect. I wish that the abortion bill was actually in effect right now. I don't know how to fix that, but the last question I had before you is, Carrie Ann Lisenby is putting forth a bill that's going to put kind of history and kind of how judges have ruled
Voting records.
voting records onto the ballot, so people can know which judges to vote in and vote out. I wanted to know your opinion on if something that were to put forward across the Senate, if you'd pass that. And number two, it's up to the Senate to confirm these judges. With the massive problem we're having in courts where judges are trying to legislate from the bench, what is the Senate trying to do to kind of better the process of getting these people confirmed? Is there going to be more of a, I don't want to say litmus test, but kind of a litmus test to find out what their leanings are in towards conservative or liberal? I mean, what's your opinion there?
The Utah Constitution prohibits using partisan tests in judicial nominations. Okay, so the hard part is they aren't going to answer party questions and where they are politically on those things, right? And they don't have to. And if they do, they have pretty good argument that we're out of bounds. So that's part of the problem. The other part of the problem is we've got a tough process trying to dig through and figure out, we don't have private eyes. It's literally, just if I walked up to you and said, hey, we're going to nominate Ingrid to be a judge, and you didn't know her at all. So, you got to try and look at some social media. Like, what do you really know about this person that you've never met or don't know anything about? What I will say is we are reaching out to friends of friends of friends and getting better information. So that's one. If you watch the hearing from, the first hearing from Judge Nielsen, who's the proposed new Supreme Court justice, his nomination hearing was yesterday. You will see a different line of questioning than we have hit on the other Supreme Court judges. We have another one on Monday, and we'll be pouring through. And really, what we're doing is we've all taken the last two Supreme Court nominations. We have some regrets, and we're just all committed to do it better. But both of those judges, when I asked them about originalism and asked them about republics and asked them about, they all answered the questions the way you would want them to be answered. And so the problem is, you don't know the next time you're going to get an activist. I mean, it's just one of the
we're having the problem in this state that there's a lot of Democrats registering Republican because they know for a fact they'll never get voted into office as a Democrat, and so they register Republican. They're full Democrat, and then they
a lot of judges are nonpartisan.
So you can have the same problem amongst judges that they know exactly what you want to hear, and they'll just say what you want to hear. But then once they get into office, it's something completely different. So, like I said, it's hard to find out anything about them. So
that's why I'm hoping being able to see a performance record of some sort is going to be.
I'm gonna say Carrie Ann Lisby and I see eye to eye on many things, and so it's very rare that I won't support something Carrie Ann puts forward. And I think more transparency in our courtrooms can only be beneficial. So that, that's where I'm at.
Keep doing what you're doing. I mean, if you want to spend 60 seconds, I mean, how's your wife doing in the mayoral race?
She's doing well. We are both counting down the minutes to Thursday night or to Tuesday night at 8:00 next week. And, we're hoping for a good result. She is a hardworking, honest, and full of integrity. And her only really poor decision is her choice in men.
Well, God bless you and your family, and thank you so much for your service.
Well, thank you for having me on. It's always a pleasure.
Thank you. We'll talk to you next time.
Okay. Take care, guys.
Bye.
So that was Senator Daniel McCay. As you can tell, he's a very conservative senator. We completely support the guy, all his initiatives. SB 54 is a difficult subject, and we got to figure out a way as a populace here in Utah to be able to elect people through the caucus system, which means most of us here in Utah have got to learn what the caucus system is. Because if I were to go down the street and ask people how the caucus system works, most people don't understand how it works. And when you go to the caucus meetings that are held to be able to select delegates, like I said, I'm a delegate, she's a delegate, most people don't even show up to those meetings. So it's literally...
I think most people need to understand what vetting is and what the vetting process is, and that delegates aren't choosing somebody because they had a commercial on TV or because they are nice. Vetting is looking into backgrounds and what they stand for. And without that system, it's going to be like
it's a popularity contest, because with delegates they really talk to them and you take money out of it, because now they're showing up to libraries, they're showing up to schools, and they're talking to delegates one-on-one, and the delegates are really drilling into what do you believe, what are you going to vote for, what are you going to push forward, and you get a lot more out of that than you get some radio or TV ad or some billboard.
We're able to look
sign.
into the records and see what did they stand for before, how long have they been in the party, do they really have the same principles that we believe in?
And most delegates really, really care. I do see, like Senator McCay was saying, a lot of delegates will vote and then they're gone. They kind of disappear. They just kind of became a delegate out of luck sometimes. And those of you delegates that are out there, you got to stay participating in the entire process. You got to be amongst your neighbors, teaching them and instruct them on, this is what I found out, this is what I'm learning, so that they know how to vote, because we are dealing with the signature process. And if your neighbors don't know how to vote and don't know what you're learning, then what good is it to have a delegate in office or essentially in that position? So there's got to be a way we can get rid of SB 54, and the way we get rid of it is we as a populace, we as a voting body, we've got to vote in senators into the Utah Senate that will vote against that and not go through the signature process. And as delegates, we got to be nicer to the senators so they want to go through that delegation process and go through the caucus system. We have a great group of people in the House, so we know we'll pass through the House, but as he says, they're down to like 5 people, 6 people voting or approving getting rid of SB 54. The other great thing that he's been working on is the abortion bill. And as we know, we as Utah, as conservative as we are, we definitely don't want abortion existing in Utah. And there's a lot of other states where it no longer exists, and we're kind of getting held far back in the pack. One of the interesting things I want to point out in this article, so anytime anything happens with an abortion bill, Planned Parenthood steps in. They're the first people to file lawsuits. And the second that Utah passed our law, we passed our law long before Roe versus Wade was overthrown. But the second Roe versus Wade was overthrown, our law activated instantaneously. And the second our law activated, Planned Parenthood sued Utah. And that's where the problem is we're allowing Planned Parenthood to kind of dictate our laws because they know what they're doing. And they're not just doing it here in Utah, but as this article states, they've sued in, let me find it. Yeah, right here where it says 12 states have banned abortion access. 10 states have imposed stricter gestational limits. 19 states kept their laws at viability, similar to what was in place under Roe versus Wade, and then 9 states have expanded their laws to include some full-term abortions. So it's kind of a mix amongst all the states. But any of the states that are trying to do like a complete ban or even mostly banned, they're immediately getting sued by the ACLU or Planned Parenthood. And a couple of these states are trying to fight through those lawsuits just like Utah is. So the Arkansas, Alabama, Oklahoma, and South Dakota, all 4 of these states have total abortion bans. And Roe versus, where Planned Parenthood has tried to fight those, but has not been successful. There are other states like South Carolina and a few others where they've got partial bans on abortion, but where Planned Parenthood is starting to win in those, at least part of those cases. There's also cases in Arizona, Ohio, Missouri, where their more restrictive abortion laws were overturned by vote amongst the state citizens. It was put out onto the ballot, and they're losing those. So there's a massive fight against abortion. Now, most of us that are conservative, we want to get rid of the abortion problems because that's just flat out murder. And if you're a blue state, then you, like was just passed up in Wisconsin with our vice presidential candidate with Kamala, Tim Walz, he just signed it into law that they can have abortion up there clear up into birth. So which is crazy that people don't see that as murder. But our own homegrown Senator McCay here is fighting hard for that, but right now it's in the Supreme Court hands, and we'll just have to see where that is. The issue we're having is we've got some fairly liberal judges in there that are holding to the stay on the abortion law until further stuff can be decided. But the problem is they're not taking it up and deciding on it. They're just kind of letting it stay there, which in essence is what they're doing is they're letting the stay stand because they're trying to mesh, as judges, they're trying to legislate and try to mix the ban on abortion that was passed in the House together with what Planned Parenthood wants, and they're trying to find some middle ground there, leaning more towards Planned Parenthood, but they know they can't go completely against the law, but they can't go completely for Planned Parenthood, which is where they want to go as more liberal judges. So their best decision now is just to hold the stay and keep the law out, keep the law banned, which is legislation in and of itself, which is a decision in and of itself. They're literally deciding with Planned Parenthood without openly deciding with Planned Parenthood, which is kind of corrupt as well. So got a couple of new judges going to the court. As he just said, they're currently confirming them in the next few days here, next week or so, and we'll see what the new judges have to say. And maybe Supreme Court is waiting on that, so they have a full Supreme Court to make the decision, not just the people that are in office. I mean, maybe that's in their decision-making process. Who knows? The only topic that we were going to bring up with McCay that we did bring up was the Utah law to take out flags out of the classrooms and stuff like that. The legislature kind of put that down onto the State Board of Education to decide how they're going to implement that. And they're still trying to figure out ways to implement that. I was wanting to talk to them about that, but there's a number of school districts that don't want to implement the ban, and they're fighting it, and they think that through leaving the implementation process to the school boards that they can kind of manipulate that law. And I'm afraid that that's what's going to happen, is there are going to be some inconsistencies from school district to school district about the implementation of that law, and we're going to end up having to see further legislation. So we'll see what happens there. Any final words there?
No, try to be more of a critical thinker and listen to both sides of the argument, and be a more well-rounded person. It's my suggestion.
Well, look forward to a lot of episodes coming up here on God and Country. Again, we need listeners, not just subscribers. So listen to our full podcast, get all that information, help share it. There's a lot of great information we have in these podcasts. This is God and Country, and we will see everybody next week.